My name is Hugh Taylor. I was born here in Melbourne to English, Scottish and Irish ancestors, the first of whom came to Victoria in 1837. I trained here at the University of Melbourne as an ophthalmologist, and for the last 10 years I've been in the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health working on Indigenous eye health, as Marcia has just been talking about. And I too would like to pay my respects to the elders of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, past, present, future, and to the other Indigenous people who are here with us today. It's a great pleasure really to be here today. And I'm not quite sure that how well I'll facilitate this session, because I know we've got some very strong and people with really good experience and ideas and thoughts. And some people have been introduced, but could we just spend a minute and just run down the table and just say who we are and where we're from, so that people can actually identify who's who?
Well, I'm Janet McCalman. I'm an historian who lives in the School of Population and Global Health.
Jane Freemantle, Paediatric Epidemiologist, but particularly with a focus on data linkage and improving outcomes for Indigenous children. University of Melbourne and Kaiela Institute.
Lucas at Toca. I'm the Chief Health Officer at Miwatj Health, which is the regional NACCHO in East Arnhem. And as Marcia said, our acting CEO Melanie's here, whom I tried to rope into the table, but she refused and sent me here.
I'm Shawana Andrews, Palawa woman. I'm based here at the University of Melbourne in Faculty of Dentistry, Medicine and Health Sciences. I'm a lecturer, I have multiple hats. I'm a lecturer in Health Sciences, I'm Associate Dean for Indigenous Development for the faculty, and I'm also a PhD student.
I'll just take my mint out. I'm Pat Turner. I'm an Aranda and Gurindji woman from the Northern Territory. I'm also the CEO of NACCHO, which is the national peak body representing the interest of our 141 member services around Australia.
Ray Lovett, a Nyampa, Western New South Wales, and an epidemiologist at the ANU in Canberra.
And I should say that it was Pat who launched our 2016 update of the work on Indigenous eye health that Marcia was talking about. So thank you, Pat, and it's wonderful to have you with us too. What we're wanting to do now is talk about project design and evaluation, and really to look at the need for local evaluations. And we had some really good sessions this morning, those 3 examples. But whether people want to talk about their experience of, because we come across this table as sort of researchers in one sort or another, or as a service provider, and how do we engage with getting that local evaluation and helping people recognise their local needs?
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Right. Well, in one sense, I feel I've got nothing to say, because I felt that the examples this morning were absolutely brilliant in terms of project design, conduct and outcomes. So what else can one say? I can perhaps talk as an historian who has been living in a population health environment for nearly 20 years now, in where I've become very committed to bringing to the bare numbers, the statistics, a rich, varied historical, social, emotional, cultural context. And been doing this through a thing that's gradually developed, which we've called prosopographical demography. And prosopography is a very long word which means collective biographies. And it means when you start researching a community or individuals, you actually try and construct as well as you can a life journey from birth to death with the in place and in time. So you're contextualising a life in terms of what they've lived through, who they're connected with, what's impacted on them, because my interest as an historian for a very much longer time has been the relationship between private experience and development and public history, as you live through wars, depression, decolonisation, dispersion and so on. And I think this has worked pretty well for us in producing data sets including one on Aboriginal Victorians, which was done in partnership with Bunjalaka and with Sandra Smith, the Aboriginal genealogist, in which we reconstituted the population of Victoria, which was not known because the records don't indicate that people are Aboriginal. We can only identify Aboriginal Victorians from the birth, deaths and marriage records, which recorded them assiduously, indeed recorded in the early days the putative white fathers of children who were born as a consequence often of rape to Western District settlers. So they did not leave that out. That had to go in. So they're wonderful records, but they don't say that someone's Aboriginal. And we can only reconstitute the population by doing so by relations. Now, when you put a lot of family histories together, you actually have a history of a people. And Aboriginal people know that much better than anyone else. And the sorts of things I've been thinking about to do with children, people who are descendants of immigrants, because we're also an immigrant society, we've had various waves of refugees, is that people in the community can reconstruct from oral sources as well as from written published sources and official sources, genealogies in place and time. And that there may be ways that they can be assisted to do this with technical IT expertise, but in reconstructing those histories, you're actually providing a proper history of a population. I think I've got an understanding now of what's happened with social mobility in Australia because I've done so many family histories. I haven't understood it from reading the sociology or reading the history. I've understood it from seeing families in time slowly move out of poverty and insecurity, and for most of them in this country it didn't happen until after World War II. Most of our convicts, descendants, didn't move out of intergenerational destitution until after World War II. It took that long. And so I think there's an enormous opportunity for communities to be doing this sort of research. And the research I've done has required many, many hands, so we've used volunteers. And they have been extraordinarily skillful and deeply involved and very helpful, and they become colleagues. And using this sort of community resource, we learn a huge amount. They enjoy it, and they contribute. And these are ways that we can build complex histories over time and space, which then provide data that you can analyse as a population analyst or health analyst with lots more variables. It's like what Maggie raised about that question that was asked about children having access to elders. It's actually having all of those sorts of factors brought in, and it's only community members who will think of that. So,
can I just talk about the local evaluation, which is, I think, what you were posing the question. And I think if we think back to all the work we've been, all the wonderful words we've listened to, local evaluation is important, provided the local people are able to evaluate their own areas of interest. And we do that by providing them with really good data. So that's the comment I want to make. In Western Australia, and I'm acknowledging Professor Fiona Stanley, who was the initiator of the data linkage in Western Australia back in the 70s with Professor Michael Hobbs, we were able to amass a database that provided the information back to the local communities so they could then evaluate what they wanted to evaluate in their own communities.
Yeah, Lucas, you're not in WA, you're in East Arnhem Land, and engaged in running a health service there, terrific health service. I mean, how do you sort out the need for local evaluation and work there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far, and also with the caveat that I think anything I can say today in this company and in this panel is going to be commonplace and completely inadequate, because I feel absolutely dwarfed and humbled by what's been happening today. So this is quite hard, actually. But I think we definitely. I think we have a twofold problem. On the one hand, there's not always enough support and enough space for effective local evaluation that allows us to explore what the local communities are interested in. But also, on the other hand, there is a complete overwhelming excess of national evaluation and externally designed evaluation, external imposed evaluation that just comes in that broad bucket of Indigenous programs that need to be evaluated at a national level. And I was just thinking, as my colleagues were speaking on, a very clear example, the NDIS, famous, infamous NDIS, has been rolling out in East Island for the last 10 months. And in that space, we have been approached and asked quite firmly to participate in an NDIS co-design of Community Connectors Evaluator. And this is all site visits with external consultants directly from Geelong, from the NDIA. The NDIS Partners in Recovery Transition, the NDIS Transition Support Program, the NDIS, then we've given evidence to the NDIS Joint Standing Committee. The NDIS Accreditation Framework evaluation of the framework, and then the actual accreditation from the framework. And in all these 5-6 evaluations that we have participated in the last 10 months, we have been saying essentially the same thing that probably will have very little impact on how the program evolves. And that is essentially the same thing that we were saying the year before the rollout in the 4 visits that we had with NDIS and NDIA executives that they were preparing for the launch. So we need both. We need local evaluation that is really locally controlled, design, and with quality data, but also we need to rethink what we're doing with all these national evaluations and whether it's actually good use of our time.
Shawana, I want to come back to you for a moment, but I just want to jump to Pat and ask for a national perspective or response to that, about how do you see that need for local... Oh, I've caught you again with it. We're going to have to do something about it.
Right. We haven't met yet, Luca, but hello.
Have that.
Look, we see our local Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations, of which there are 141 around Australia, as self-determining organisations who have an enormous resource at their fingertips in terms of their patient data. And it's how many resources they have also, though, to interpret that data for the benefit of relaying it to the community and engaging the community in working out better pathways forward for people and the community collectively to become more actively engaged in achieving better health outcomes at that level. And I think until that happens, and it won't be just the patient data that will affect that, there's all the social determinants of health information that needs to be fed into that for the benefit of the community. But the community-controlled health services, our members, are pivotal at the local level to using data much more effectively in engaging communities, in my view, and that should be a good way forward. I've spoken to many of our members about their data use and their systems, and but I'll get to that later.
Okay. Shawana or Roy, would you like to...
Ray.
Ray, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Would you like to
That's
make a
all right.
comment?
I guess I'd like to just say that evaluation it's the circuit breaker for any gains in Aboriginal research, whether it's in health or any other area. I've recently worked on an ARC project which has looked nationally at fathering in the context of family violence, and we, through that process, identified about 43 men's behaviour change programs or Aboriginal men's healing programs that are particularly looking at family violence and addressing issues for men/perpetrators, however you might look at it. Of those 43, we were whittled down to about 20, about half, about 2021, because the rest had their funding cut, or basically ended because of funding, whatever the reason may have been in terms of the funding we didn't delve into or not. So of that sort of half that was remaining, about 2021, we were able to engage with about 15 of those programs, none of which have been evaluated. And so when we're looking at family violence impacting upon, I would say, all of our communities across Australia, we're not evaluating these programs that are actually a key intervention, one of many, but a key intervention in terms of addressing family violence in our communities. How do we know if we're doing the work well? How do we know what's working? So I think there's two issues there. It's around funding, but it's also about the ethics, the research that's being done in these communities. What's happening in terms of that research? Where's the questioning around the program design? We get nitpicked around recruitment and other small things in terms of our research design, but we're not held to account about the whole approach to the research process, which includes research translation and evaluation to close that loop for the research process. And so they're really the two key issues for me: is the ethics. How do we influence that ethical that process, and how do institutions like universities come to the party there, when in fact the ethics process, from my perspective, is just a ticker box from a university's perspective, when in fact it's so much more about that in terms of addressing the priorities of our communities.
Listening to you talk reminds me of time I spent working with a Japanese ophthalmologist running courses in public health for eye care providers in a variety of East Asian countries. And his maxim was that action without a plan is bad, but action without evaluation is worse.
Yeah,
and that's right. Exactly what you're saying.
That's right, exactly.
You know, it's to do stuff without seeing what impact it has is absolutely pointless.
That's right, that's right.
Ray, I apologise for the slip of Roy, but have you got a comment, Ray?
Probably a couple. So the first would be, I guess, in Australia, from some of the work that I've done, we don't do evaluation, it seems to me, very well at all. And in fact, like similar to your experience in the family violence space, ironically, we did a similar sort of review a couple of years ago, and found that over half the projects that had received funding had stopped at some point for some reason, and that half of those hadn't had a full evaluation as well. And I think some of the experience I've had around tobacco control, so we talked a little bit about tobacco, so I'll do some work there, is that often evaluation's a bit of an afterthought. So often there's a dire situation. This is kind of how I see it occurs. So all of a sudden, you know, we've got to do something now, and then evaluation always comes a bit later, when in fact, when we're thinking about our program logic around how we're rolling out programs and those sorts of things which are crucial to evaluation, aren't thought at the start. So I know I'm working with a couple of communities at the moment where we're trying to pick up a year or two into a program implementation to try and evaluate the effectiveness of the program. The final point I guess I would make, and I got into heaps of trouble about a year ago for doing this, but I'll do it anyway, is that I think there's a huge problem in evaluation work at the moment, and I think it's getting worse because I haven't heard anyone talk about the hierarchy of evidence. It really, really concerns me at the moment, particularly in some levels of government, that they're requesting evaluations or assessment of the effectiveness of programs using randomised control trials only. For social and behavioural interventions, often that's the space that I deal in, it's often ethically tenuous to run randomised control trials when in fact there are better methods to use in those circumstances which do not limit access to services and treatment for clients. Because when you talk about randomised control trials, that's what you're talking about, withholding service.
Can I just raise a question? Should researchers be doing their own evaluations? I mean, they have a vested interest in it working. And I know we have an evaluation unit in our school, and I think there is a problem of evaluating your own work.
Can I just go back and mention a couple of points that Shawana raised, and expanding the evaluation from a local evaluation to evaluation of research and federally funded projects. Now, this is something that colleagues here who've been working on the review of the values and ethics have been really tussling with. Because what we have at the moment, and it's a bit like Maggie was talking about, an advisory council has no legs. With the values and ethics that we set down with the NHMRC and hopefully now the ARC, that's got no legs. So if we get reports, we get applications which say we are going to do this, so initial intent. It goes to a grant review panel. It's because they've ticked the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander box, then it goes to this particular panel. And you see research projects that promise the world, and they're going to build the capacity, and they're going to fund continuing education, they're going to provide equipment and so on. At the end of that first year, you tick a box that actually says, I haven't changed, I'm doing the same thing I'm doing, and everything's quite fine. And at the end of the final, maybe 3 or 5 years, you put in a report, but at no stage is there any sanction for anybody in that, or any decent evaluatory process that will provide an ongoing evaluation of whether that project is running as it's promised, or at the end of the day, whether they've actually undertaken. So we should be getting the community that is being researched to evaluate that program. And if indeed the community say, no, we weren't consulted, no, we haven't had any of our staff being funded, no, we haven't seen any equipment, then that should be enough to blacklist those people from doing further research. That's where I think evaluation should be also looked at.
But communities need to be resourced to do the evaluation as well.
Yeah, absolutely,
And
I agree with that.
The number of times that universities are approached by communities to say, we want this program evaluated, we think it's working really well, but we want the evidence to support our hunch, and turned away. So we actually have to ensure that...
Exactly, but I think that the NHMRC needs to, and whenever we've talked about it, they say, oh, we can't afford it, we can't do it.
That's right, it always gets back to time and money, doesn't
someone
it?
has to be able to afford it, and all the community's been asked, did they do what they said they're going to do, and someone else will do the evaluation.
Yeah, but you're talking here at a high level of university, national funded competitive research, which is not terribly relevant to many of the people here in the communities here. And that system has inherent problems, that it's short term, the money is never sufficient, it takes you a year to get or more to get your ethics clearance, so you start a year late, or you can't get your data, as poor Jane experienced.
I got my data.
Eventually, but took you nearly the whole time of your grant waiting for that data. And the realities are that people apply for grants in science, usually on the basis of work already done, and which they're going to do the next project. Now, it's a terrible model and a terrible practice for trying to do the sensitive, democratic, and I'm going to use the word democratic research that people are interested here in terms of data sovereignty. And so, can we think beyond that academic box?
I would like to move exactly to that
Okay, all right.
beyond the academic box, because the next is about the IAS. And in the background material, there was some comments about how, I was going to say effective in quotes, that change was. But I'd like the the panel to comment on that impact that the change in funding that is in the IAS has had, and the impact that's having on data collection and sovereignty in the Indigenous communities. Pat?
Yeah, I'd like to start on that. Having been a former CEO of AIATSIS, and the way we administered programs was quite different and much better than the IAS. So the IAS Indigenous Advancement Strategy was rolled out, and it was a lot of smoke and mirrors, quite frankly. It said that they'd rolled these hundreds of different programs that had existed into 5. Well, that wasn't the case, because inside the bureaucracy, they were still had the hundreds of little, teams working on the individual grant sets. So when when they actually made the machinery of government change, in my view, and put the Aboriginal Affairs portfolio into the Prime Minister's portfolio, that was mistake number one. Mistake number two was they abolished a grant management system that we had developed in AIATSIS, which was the best model. And they just abolished it because they wanted this other one, and that was complete evidence to those of us who knew about this of their complete lack of understanding of Aboriginal programs and projects and how to manage those grants properly. And then they, of course, had this, bull program, rolling these hundreds of grants into 5. And then Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey cut $500 million out of that allocation. So that was just rubbing the salt into the wound, really. With the 5 programs that they, say they have, which they don't really, they have just had an ad hoc, chaotic grant system that has not been based, in my view, on any sensible response to need. It's all been based on, the minister called in yesterday, we briefed him on how bad the situation was and he promised us, he'd give us $300,000 to fix it. And, and you just see it time after time after time. And the first time when they rolled it out, they said that applications had to be in on a certain date and that we would hear within a month. It took about 6 months for the responses, So it was a major stuff up from the start and it hasn't been fixed.
Ray, they say every cloud has a silver lining. Is there a silver lining?
If you can find one, brother, tell me.
I guess in chaos, as described, there's always opportunity.
Yeah.
There's some sort of saying. Some of the work that I've been involved with is around developing, from community level programs, developing useful templates and tools. So my suggestion is that it's likely universities are not the best. Often I get phone calls from organisations or people in organisations in community that I know and know me, and I have some evaluation experience, to say, we've got this program running, would you be able to help us out? And so more and more of these requests are coming, and I don't understand why we didn't have a process like that in the IAS.
No.
There's some really... Yeah. There's some really good simple tools and templates that groups have built in the past, and I know some of them are still around. It's just making sure that we have a handle on that knowledge that has been produced before. I know Lovett has done some work before as well, so that we can provide that every time other systems and processes fall over, so that people aren't continually reinventing the wheel. I think this is the thing that goes on a lot. Yeah. It'd be nice to get into a big system like the IAS to say, let's have these sort of templates available, or a suite of templates available, depending on the program you're trying to implement, available to assist community-based organisations to do that. And it really has to be prefaced on, what is the right question that community is trying to answer. That's what we've talked about most of today, is, so what's important to local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? So most of the stuff I hear is it's about connection to country, connection to our land, connection to culture, those sorts of things. And so how do we measure the impact of all these different programs that may be going on in communities. So some have many, many, many across different agencies. But how do we capture, the evidence in whatever form that comes, whether it's a randomised controlled trial, whether it's a cross-sectional analysis of community-level data, whether it's linked data, whether it's whatever form. What tools are available that communities can use, and how can we ensure that that capacity is available locally?
Well, I've really been asking the panel questions and getting answers. If somebody from Lovett or from AIATSIS or from somebody else wanted to jump up and make a point, they'd be very welcome. And I'm sure if Marcy was standing here, she'd say you have to walk all the way around and stand by the microphone. but you don't all have to sit there and listen to everything that's being said if there's things that you want to pose and make a point. But Lucas, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the IAS, and I fully agree. Our experience on the ground mirrors almost eerily what Pat was reporting nationally at every single stage of the process. But even from a data point of view and the opportunities lost in terms of improving the data sets and the information that we have to inform policy. The chaos of the IAS spilled over some of the existing programs that we had, and a clear example is the transfer of social emotional wellbeing services and substance use funding from Department of Health to the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and subsequent amalgamation into the IAS fake unified program, while still maintaining its reporting within the online service reporting component of the Department of Health funding that we send through to Indigenous Health Division, formerly Indigenous, and Rural Health Division, formerly AIATSIS. Completely compromise the quality of those data, because we are reporting on positions funded under SCWB, encounters funded under SCWB and substance use for a program that might exist in the back end of the government arrangement. We discovered a few months ago when some of that funding was cut and moved to the Northern Territory government. But in our frontline service delivery does not exist, because we have an amalgamated IAS unified program that delivers a comprehensive integrated service. So it wasn't chaotic just from the service provision perspective, but also from the data collection.
I want to move on to the issues around data linkages and stuff like that, because I know we've got a couple of people who've had some profound experiences there, and I can see Jane just about bursting out of her skin.
Look, thanks, Hugh. And look, yes, unashamedly, I'm a kind of data linkage geek. But I've actually seen, and again, acknowledging Professor Fiona Stanley for the work that we initiated in Western Australia. And that was through linking a series of databases that Stanley and Hobbs started up in the 70s. But we were able to link data between this population data that gave us a much better understanding of the true population, particularly of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children.
And I guess the question really is, if you're looking at project design and evaluation, what the lessons that you've learned from all that linkage, how would you play that doing it again, or for somebody else to do a similar sort of project?
Well, how would I play? In Western Australia, it was terrific, but I think in Victoria it hasn't been so terrific. That's what we're very happy about. But look, I think, what do we learn? I mean, I think one of the things that we learn, and I want to even take it further, and my colleague Karen Ferguson's in the audience, is what we've actually taken even further to the Goulburn Murray region, where instead of having to go down to 50 Lonsdale Street to fight to get good data, health department here, we've actually gone to 7 different health services, Aboriginal community controlled organisations, local councils and governments. But what we've actually done, and what is different, is we started with the community. The community themselves said, this is what we want to do. We want to get this information. We want to have a better understanding. We know we underestimate the particular population by 50%. And they were saying, we want to get this information. So starting with the population, the community, who then wrote the guiding principles, so actually said, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to manage the data, here are the terms of reference. 70% of that advisory group were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. This proof of concept then allowed us to start small and to prove that we could actually link these data, and now Karen Ferguson will take this and do it as a major PhD project. So it's about consulting the community to make sure that's what they want to do. And they were very clear that this is what they needed. And then working with them to actually develop the relationships with the different services that we were then going to link the data with, and then using this proof of concept to expand and do the things we need to do, building the capabilities of one of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues.
Shawana, did you?
I don't know that I have too much to say about data linkage. I don't have the experience.
And Janet certainly has.
Yes, I mean, the thing is that if the other issue with data linkage is privacy, and also when you start linking different data sets, you start developing quite different knowledge about individuals. So in talking about records, data, all the rest of it, yes, there is the question of community control and consent, but there's also individual control and consent and privacy rights. Should a community, this is a question for you, have clinical knowledge about other members of their community? Is it right that non-professional people might know medical facts about other members of other families or their own family that they haven't disclosed? There are actually a whole range of very important issues around the rights of individuals to privacy and to autonomy, which are equally important as community.
Can I just argue with that I think that what's been developed over the years are very good and solid and sound governance principles and protocols. For example, the person who's actually looking or doing some of the data linkage will have no ability to actually do the analysis of the data. Okay. The fact that certain reporting is done in such a way that no individual can ever be identified. And I think that over the years that we've developed stronger and more principled governance principles that enable us to protect the confidentiality of the people we're working with. They're also remembering this is population data, particularly if we're looking at the vital statistics or the vital statistics data, births and deaths. It would be unethical to go back and try and get permission to find out if you want to do some mortality data when a child's died. So there are all those conflicting ethical issues that we have been able to manage, I believe, really well with really good, strong governance structures.
Well, that's terrific, yeah.
And Pat wanted to say something.
Well, not my experience. In terms of health data that's collected at the local clinic level, for it to be shared, if that was, people can work it out in the community.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, no, I agree
if they had access to that. So my contention is no, it doesn't work at the community level because communities are generally so small that people can work out who you're talking about and will very smartly.
Yes.
That's all I wanted to say at this point.
I was thinking
quality of data, I'll say some more.
When Jason was talking earlier on about wanting data by the small sort of tribal or tribal groups, that even in the Northern Territory, it won't give you breakdown of healthcare given to Aboriginal people because the numbers are relatively small if you start to break it down below the state or the territory levels. And so you really have problems if you start to have the data so granular, you get small communities.
Well, it's important for our services, and Dr. Buffer can illustrate that, probably most eloquently, with the breakdown of the, using the PBI, the power, power PBI, isn't it? Power BI, and how you can use the national data and drill down to a local level.
I saw Fiona put her hand up. Is it? Yes, please. Buffer, did you want to say?
No, go ahead.
After Fiona.
It's just answering the question about, what are our learnings from data linkage.
I should say Fiona Stanley from...
Oh, sorry, Fiona Stanley.
No, that's all right.
From both Western Australia and now University of Melbourne. Yeah. And I think that if you want to use linked data, and this is not necessarily going down to small communities, I agree that there are real issues about that, and I think that's really difficult, that you have to have what we call unit record data if you want to evaluate policy. You have to know who received the service. It's all anonymised and you only look at the linked data sets. But if you don't, you have to know that that person received the service, or if they received the service and didn't pursue it. That, in other words, you have to know what dose they got if you really want to evaluate a service. And you want to know the people for whom that service never worked at all. How applicable it is to Aboriginal populations, for example, is a really important part of the data linkage capacity. And I think that's a really important one. The problem that we've had, I mean, these are all mistakes that I've made. I've made every mistake in the book, so I can share my mistakes with you, is that we've had the deficit model. We've had the deficit model. So how you define health is you define it by death. How you define mental health is you define it by suicide and all that. So we've moved very strongly now. Sandra Eads and I are doing a study now on what makes kids resilient. In other words, we don't really want to know why everyone's doing badly. What are the kids who do really well? Because that's going to inform your effective preventive strategies. And I think we just have to keep on, saying, we want to convert to a more positive paradigm of what makes for good communities, good families, good services, etc. And there are lots of bad services, and you could focus on that. But what about the good ones? And I think that's really important. The other thing is that we link our data in Western Australia, and I think increasingly nationally, to surveys and studies that are done where you get the in-depth information from Aboriginal people, the kinds of things that you're doing in community. And when we do that, we did that with the WA Aboriginal Childhood Survey, we got a 97% response rate from Aboriginal parents to be part of the linked data. Now, I felt fantastic about that, because what it's about is about trust. But what a responsibility it gave us then to use those data to improve outcomes. So that's my recurring nightmare, that we haven't done enough on that. So that's another of my, my deficit thinking that, we should have used this data more powerfully. We're going to address this in the last session, of course, of why we haven't used the data sets that we have. But in enabling that linkage to the WA Aboriginal Child Health Survey, we were the only people in Australia to have statistically quantified not just the extent of the stolen generation, but the impact into third generations of all the things you've been talking about today. And that's immensely powerful, immensely powerful. And I think that, in fact, Canberra didn't believe it. The whole team, which was made up of both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal researchers, had to redo the analysis completely to convince Canberra, A, that it was a high proportion of communities in Western Australia who were forcibly removed from land or family, between 40 and 60% of every community survey. If that's not a stolen generation, give me another definition that is. And the second thing was that intergenerational trauma. That really, I don't know why people aren't affected more by these data, actually. I guess they don't want to be, and I'll come back to the Commonwealth and its inability to encourage us to blocking of using data. The other thing is the Aboriginal researchers who are on the project, and now most of them are heading the projects. And I think that's been incredibly important, because what we didn't do very well initially with our record linkage is to get that Aboriginal interpretation in there. I will now no longer be part of a quantitative study that doesn't have a qualitative Aboriginal interpretation as well. Aboriginal people can do the quantitative stuff, but we need the Aboriginal people to tell us what it actually means in terms of the quantitative data, what it actually means. And it gets a very different answer. And the next study you do will be different, because you'll ask different questions, be guided along that way. So I think that's really something that I've learnt, and I didn't do very well at the beginning. In terms, I'll just do one more minute, and that's about the Commonwealth not wanting us to have access to their linked data sets until very recently. And I thought that it was the privacy issues, and we didn't get any response, and I'm going to mention it by name, from Jane Halton. Didn't even respond to our letters to requesting why. We requested data, the PBS data, the MBS data, no response at all. I don't think it was actually privacy. I think it was the issues that Maggie was actually talking about, is that there's this block. They don't want us to evaluate the services that have been so hopeless. And we would have been able to do that if they'd given us the data. So I feel very angry about this still, I think you can probably tell. And also that let's learn from this. And if any way I can be useful now, I don't care what I say anymore. I'm 71. They can jail me if I commit some kind of perjury. But if there's anything we can do to help you guys get into a better system and a state where you can use these data effectively, then use us old ladies to do so, or old blokes and everyone.
just before you sit down, can I ask you one quick question? When you've got to choose between a conspiracy and a cock-up, you should always pick a cock-up. But it's interesting that Martin Bowles, who was working so hard to bring together the MBS and PBS data, suddenly stepped down.
Yes,
as
and Stephen Kennedy, who's in the PM&C, who was hot to trot on this stuff, he's gone to infrastructure.
So it's interesting how that's changing. Buffett, did you still want to say something? All right. Have we done data linkage at the moment?
Yeah.
Rob, come on.
One thing.
Right. Oh, no, sorry.
I'll defer.
gave the invitation to speak from the Literature Institute point of view. And I just want to say that Fiona's on our board, and June Oscar's on our board, and Pat Anderson's on our board, amongst others. And it's just fantastic to work with amazing Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal women. Just in terms of evaluation, there's an exposure draft at the moment out from PM&C to looking at their currently drafted evaluation framework. So I think it's just an alert. We should really have a look at that, interrogate that. I saw an earlier version of what they'd been kicking around in their heads, which was completely substandard and quite confused. So I gave some feedback on that. I haven't yet had a look at what they've come up with. In terms of the Literature Institute, we've got a project funded at the minute which is looking quite specifically at evaluation from our perspective, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, and what should that framework look like. The timing of this is not great because that work is still underway with people like Sean Ewan and Yin Paradies and others involved in that. We had hoped that it might feed into the program design for IAS. But I think, last budget, there was $40 million in the last budget around research and evaluation. In fact, 50 million.
50, yeah.
50 million. 40 million on evaluation, 10 million on ostensibly research for the COAG Closing the Gap agenda, and 2.9, just to complete the picture, on a productivity commissioner, Aboriginal productivity commissioner in the productivity commission. So I think, we've got to have the long game in mind, which is about, disruption and redesign, and our mob right at the forefront of that. But I think there are some opportunities right now that we can seize as well. So they're just a couple of things that I thought I'd mention.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Rob. I think we're done with data linkage. Ray, you want to say something?
The only thing I'd say about data linkage is, again, we've talked about it all day, but I think for some projects across the country that I'm aware of, if we're thinking about Indigenous data sovereignty and particularly data governance, so the processes involved, and I think these particularly apply to big projects like data linkage. So starting out with a data governance process around linkage, if you're thinking about a data linkage project, having your principles, but also the data governance process well established before you even think about variables, would be a really good way to go.
Yes, I was talking to Margaret Kelleher at lunch, and she was talking about problems with ethics clearance on a thing that had some linkage and some genetics. And you put two bombs together, you've got a real problem. But you're quite right, you need to get the governance very well sorted out. Given where we are with time, we've got sort of two areas around data. One is on the quality of data, and the other is on the availability and transparency. And maybe we can discuss those two areas sort of together. So it's quality, but also availability and transparency. And thinking again, when we're designing a project or evaluating a project, what do we need to think about in terms of quality, availability and transparency of data?
I can just talk, you talk about thinking about how you're designing a project. Well, again, going back to the data linkage facility, if I can just think about if we are going to design early childhood centre, or we're going to design an antenatal care centre in Victoria, then we need to know the number of Aboriginal mothers that might be accessing those, or babies. And what we haven't been able to do is to actually determine the correct number of mothers or babies that are born to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mothers. So again, it's about thinking what is the true population? What is the integrity of the data that's actually underpinning that particular service that you might be wanting to put into place? And for example, we showed in Victoria we'd underestimated the birth population by 120%, and in the Western Metro region was 269%. So if you're wanting to put in programs, how can you actually put in programs that are going to accurate or properly provide the services for those people? So we need to have really good data that's accurate, that the integrity is sound, so that we can actually go and put in services that are going to be appropriate.
Shawana, do you want to?
I think for me, in terms of quality of data and thinking about program design, we really have to go back to that very fundamental question of ethics. Thinking about the ethic of moral choice, so upon whose authority do we decide that this research is important? Is it meeting the community priorities, or what's the motivation around our thinking that this is important? Does that come from an academic space? Does it come from community space? Is there a collaboration there? I think in terms of the ethic of prior thought as well, what knowledge does community bring to this area of research? What do we already know? And that might include pre-contact knowledge as well. So thinking about some of those ethical issues, our ethical vulnerabilities in terms of the program design and how that'll impact on quality of data, for me is the critical first step in thinking about any kind of research.
I guess a problem that services on the ground, Aboriginal-owned organisations that are governed by community will, sometimes we face, is that you have to have a significant specific mass or size, even budgetarily and staffing-wise, to start to be able to determine your own priorities. Otherwise, it's really hard for a small community service to fight against the two big tides of whatever design and programs are brought in by the funding bodies and whatever research and projects research are driven, and then they approach your community. It takes years of maturation and significant resources. And of course, I mean, I think they're a great example of doing this successfully is Congress. And Miwatj is becoming large enough that our board is starting to push for this more effectively. But to be able to say, actually, no, what we're interested in is this, and we have enough cash flow and reserves or Medicare available money to start to explore our own programs that our community has designed. And then if they're successful, then we can navigate the political space to attract funding. And the same for research. We are at a stage in which we are placing moratoria and we are linking with the universities. We were discussing this at the DOT a few weeks ago with a lot of people who are here today. Melbourne is an example, or Menzies, in which we are taking things a step back and saying, stop approaching us with projects. These are our priorities. If you don't match these priorities, don't even knock. But most services cannot do that. And most services are still determined by what the funding body comes up with, and there's this new bucket of funding, are you interested? And the answer tends to be yes. And then you try to work out your community priorities and your local design into a hybrid thing that then you can work out backwards to satisfy your funding requirements. So it's all well and good, and we need good quality and we need local design, but for the reality is that for most ORIC registered Aboriginal organisations that are not of a certain size, they're really limited on that capacity.
And we had that example brought up this morning when communities get data from, I think it was from AIATSIS, a package, they don't know how to handle it. It made me remember back in the 70s on the Trachoma program, before we left a community, we gave them a carbon copy of every single data form for each person, plus a summary form on top of that. And I went back to some of those communities 20 years later to do some other work and they could pull out those forms out of the bottom of a drawer. Nobody had ever looked at them. They didn't know how to use them. So although we thought we were doing the right thing and leaving the data with the committee, some committees obviously made a lot of use with it. But it's really important to make sure, as part of that transparency, that the communities actually know and understand what the data are and how they could use them or interpret them or move on to the next step.
And this is a great, this is a great disappointment of the IAS, that, you know, this process could impact significantly on capacity building for communities, to be able to have the skills and build those skills.
Ray, you found a silver lining on that cloud. How could we turn the IAS into a more effective way to help build those services? Is there some way we can manage that?
There's still time, isn't there? I think
Well, it hasn't changed yet, but just wait.
it's going to change. Like, you know, that's the reality. Something's going to happen at some point. So you should still be able to develop those tools, those instruments, the things that Romilly mentioned just before, so that, you know, in anticipation of further change or reversion or modification, whatever, you know, we sort of stay that course about, well, we just develop these tools and instruments and frameworks for people to make available when they do need them. Yeah.
Would you please come forward? Thank you.
Glenys Grogan, Sunset Western Yalanji from North Queensland. I've been sitting here like you, humbled and dwarfed, but I've got grey hairs, so you're not, it's happening to everybody. But there's a few things I wanted to raise, and I was just listening to the capacity building money. It took us over 2 years to actually finally get in a small amount of monies to build the capacity of our organisation from IAS, so it is possible. And that took a lot of fighting and discussing and to and froing, and it's not good as it used to be. But at least we're able to start, and maybe that would be the start to many more dollars from. And then I'm not friends with Nigel Scullion, but it might. It might bring start the path to more money. But I was really interested in what you were talking about the collective biographies from birth to death, because within the program that we run, and we'll be presenting that tomorrow. Is that we do a timeline from the time of birth and then all the impacts on a person's individual life. And I didn't quite catch that big name that you had. So
prosopography.
I know, to write it down for me.
Yes, I will. So it took me a long time to learn it to myself.
Yeah. And so that sounds good to what, because we've got untold data on that area, that it could be some way that we can actually further expand on it in the future.
Yeah, I think, and there's probably a lot of technology that can help.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to talk to you to see where that program could possibly go. There was. I've listened to the evaluation too. I'm talking rather than asking questions, because as they were talking about the different areas, it was like, oh my God, you know, this is not happening in just one place; it's happening everywhere. Like evaluation, and it's so right that. Many times evaluations are done of community programs on the ground. They aren't culturally appropriate, and so it makes the evaluation useless. So more often than not, it's the people who help you to design the program who needs to evaluate it with the people involved. And data is, it's the data that we collect, we have to do it from the people, for the people. It has to be meaningful, and it has to have benefits at the end of the project, because what's the use of doing research if it's not going to be useful to the individual Aboriginal or the individual Aboriginal community and the families that they make up. So that's what I wanted to leave with you, but this has been a very interesting day, and I'm not normally at a conference all day, so this is really good. I'm enjoying it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan.
I just wanted to add a dimension. We're talking
John
about
evaluating.
We're talking about evaluating programs.
John Buffer.
The big money is in policies, and one example, and the need to evaluate policies. So probably the best example in recent years would be income management in the Northern Territory. So 50% income management costs $100 million a year to implement in the Northern Territory for 70,000 Aboriginal people.
Oh,
And we have, so it's $8,000 per person per year at least. And we have no idea if it worked. No one really. There's a lot of people will die in a ditch and say it worked. Other people say it didn't work. But there's no intention to evaluate it because it's ideological. And the same with now there's 80%. And we look at the evaluations they've done of the new card and that it's so poor. We have no idea whether 80% works. You look at alcohol policy. These are really, we've just been through mandatory treatment cost 40 million. Didn't work. Probably didn't work. I mean, we don't know for sure. But alcohol protection orders, draconian, we're now seeing that the highest levels of government believe addictions are a bad habit. They're not a mental illness, they're not a disease. And if they're a bad habit, you treat a bad habit with punitive measures, which is the latest policy, which is to drug test people. That'll cost a lot of money, but it won't be evaluated. So we have the real power of data linkage, in my view, is if it's properly set up with if we had a longitudinal data set we've been trying to get for years, every time they make changes, we'd be able to see what's happening to hospital admissions, to homicide rates, to manslaughter rates, to a range of things. We'd be able to interrogate it if it was properly set up. But there's no intention. These policies are so ideological and there is no intention to evaluate them and they're costing an enormous amount of money. Much more than programs. I mean, the ones that get RCTs, I think, are the ones government already decide they want to defund. Like they don't like the Nurse Family Partnership Program. It's expensive, so they're going to try and do an RCT. Now that's, I think, unethical, but they're going to try and do one anyway. So if they make a decision they don't particularly like a program, they'll probably try and do an RCT on it. But they're few and far between. Most of the time, the things that really need to be evaluated, there's no intention to ever evaluate them, and we never end up any the wiser. And so policies and programs need to be evaluated.
Mine was kind of similar. Oh, sorry, Summer Finlay. I'm here for the PHA, but I have a few hats. My comment was similar to John Bopper's about ideology. I know I was actually at NACCHO when the IAS Send inquiry was on. I spoke to 98 services, including the affiliates, and pretty much all of them got the same funding without CPI that they'd gotten previously. I was at National Congress when that program was being designed. No one was being listened to in and around that. But my question was kind of around, so we know that governments have a particular ideology, and when it comes to evaluations, I've been a consultant and I've had to go out and work with communities to collect information, to evaluate government priorities. How do we actually shift that mindset so that we are actually getting both the programs that we need in community, but also the information through evaluation that we need as well? I don't know, I mean, it's a big question.
Thank you. Pat, you were nodding.
I was agreeing.
Yeah. Have you got an answer for us?
Well, I have to say that, when we were in ATSIC, we were very strong on evaluation. And so we didn't fund anything new unless we had an evaluation process built in, because we wanted to know what how well it was, how effective it was. And so, I think that I can't answer the question really, how do we make it better, apart from insisting from the outset in the initial submissions that we want funding for the evaluation of that is controlled by the local community.
So if we, as the investigator or instigator or part of that group, we should each make sure that we are
include evaluation.
to include evaluation in every project we put in.
Yeah. And if it's going to be funded.
And fight back when NHMRC says, no, you can't afford it.
No, it's got to be part of the, if NHMRC are funding it, it's got to be part of it.
The original.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying.
It does, absolutely.
And it can't be taken out.
We've got time for one last question. Jason, go for it. But if you keep it short, I've already been waved at, it's time to stop.
It's just, I want to, like I'm Jason Ford from Shawana, Nimbo man. The impacts of evaluations done with no cultural expertise. Like if I was part of a panel and I was doing an evaluation on different country, different peoples, the impacts on that culture or the cultural group, that's culturally inappropriate type of evaluation. And I think this has not been spoken about. as part of it. Like, we need to evaluate things, but we need to be mindful that the evaluation process, what are the impacts on the local cultural groups?
Yeah.
By people that are not from country, doing evaluations about people's from that country.
A very good point, and I'd just give a quick example. We've been working the last half dozen years or so on this trachoma health promotion, particularly in the Territory in South Australia, WA. We just had NINTI 1 do an evaluation for us on the impact and understanding and uptake. And I think, that's very much people from the community on the ground, talking to people in the community to get that feedback. And that's the sort of thing, the way it needs to go. I think we do need to wrap up now. Roy, Pat...
Ray.
Ray, Pat, Shawana, Lucas,
Claire,
Claire, Jane and Janet. Thank you all very much. It's been terrific. I think there's been some really good discussion. And so please join me in thanking the panel members.
Thank you, sir. I remember hearing you speak up at